Hello from Washington, D.C. There is much to be said about recent developments in Washington, in the United States, with regard to South Africa. And we will have these conversations or these discussions in the days and the weeks to follow. I have so far had a very productive week on behalf of Lex Libertas after we released the Truth Be Told report, which deals with particular individual stories or experiences of people in South Africa, and of course the Reclaiming Freedom report, which deals with the crisis in South Africa and then outlines some form of a roadmap of actions that the United States could potentially take to promote stability in the Southern African region and to play a constructive role with regard to South Africa. Now, I have made the remark several times recently that if the only thing the United States does with regard to South Africa is the refugee program, it might do more harm than good, because yes, some people would like to leave South Africa, and if they can do so, that's great. But many of those, and I'm sure most of those who leave, are doing so reluctantly, because most of them would actually want to stay in South Africa if there was a solution. Other than that, most of us, or at least a significant amount of us, would like to stay in South Africa, and we need a solution. And if we all leave South Africa, of course, it would lead to high levels of destabilization, which would have significant geopolitical bigger consequences, not just for South Africa, but for the African continent and so forth. Now, what is quite significant is that it does seem that the United States understands this, that its actions with regard to South Africa isn't simply and cannot simply be to encourage people to leave South Africa or to accept those who want to leave, but also to take certain actions to address the crisis. Now, in this report that we published recently, we make the point that there is a well-established international legal principle of territorial sovereignty, which says that countries shouldn't intervene with each other's domestic affairs. That is the case. But there are also many international principles, norms, protocols, and so forth that deal with how states could or should act when a particular state is within a state of crisis, especially when the government is collapsing or runs the risk of collapsing, and especially when people within that state is being targeted based on their identity, such as their ethnicity. Now, to a significant extent, both of these are already evident in South Africa. General state collapse, but also the targeting of minorities. So it's, in terms of these principles, well within international protocol and norms for countries to take a firm stance, because they have a responsibility to act in the interest of justice, fairness, and so forth. And it is quite significant that it seems that that is exactly what the United States government is interested in doing. And so the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor, which is an office within the State Department in Washington, D.C., the State Department, of course, are dealing with foreign affairs, have issued a statement just recently, about South Africa. And I would like to read this to you and make some quick remarks thereafter. They said that in support of the President of the United States executive orders, the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor just returned from a trip to South Africa to learn more about rural farm attacks and the breakdown of rule of law. Here's what we found. South Africa holds enormous economic and geopolitical promise. However, current breakdowns in law and order are not conducive to growth or collaboration with the United States. The South African government must speak clearly and act decisively to address crime and condemn the violence. Violent crime is rampant in South Africa, but rural attacks, especially on farms, display a distinctively brutal pattern. Local sources reported 298 farm attacks and 49 murders in 2023, and that victims are disproportionately elderly, isolated, and face delayed police response. The South African Police Service reports the number increased to 55 farm murders in 2024. These are not ordinary crimes. In some documented cases, reports detail victims tortured or killed without anything being stolen. Earlier this year, a man was beaten and hacked with a machete. In another incident, an elderly woman was assaulted and repeatedly stabbed. In both cases, no theft occurred. These attacks are not motivated by poverty alone. In a notable 2023 incident, assailants chanted, "Kill the boer, kill the farmer," as they stabbed their victim. But these aren't fringe slogans. Some South African leaders chant the same words to cheering crowds. In one case, graffiti praising these leaders was painted on a farmhouse before its owners were brutally attacked. Despite this, as the President of the United States highlighted earlier this year, many South African leaders have failed to condemn this song. The international community and mainstream media have decided to remain silent on this issue. Rejecting this moral failure, the United States condemns these brutal attacks and stands with all South Africans working to build a peaceful and more prosperous country. Now, I met with this particular office earlier this week at the State Department, and we had a very fruitful conversation about developments in South Africa, about this report that we recently published as Lex Libertas, about why it's in the interest of the United States to take a stance, and also what could be done by the United States. And we can elaborate on these things in due time, but I would say that it is very significant and it's very clear from this statement that the United States is not just interested in encouraging people to leave South Africa to go to America. Of course, they would continue with that opportunity for those who are interested, but they are also interested in finding a solution in South Africa. And when we say we need to work towards a solution, and when we at Lex Libertas say that we want to encourage the US and other countries and other international role players to contribute, we mean that we seek to do this in the interest of peace, stability, and prosperity, not just for the Afrikaner people, but for the communities in South Africa. Because if you know what's happening in South Africa, you would not be surprised to hear me say that it affects all communities. Everyone is suffering under these destructive policy ideas. Yes, the Afrikaner people and some other minorities are uniquely targeted with chants such as Kill the Boer, with laws or legislation such as the vast network of race laws in South Africa, the targeting of property rights, and so forth. But one should not be misled to think that because this community is targeted, everyone else is flourishing. People aren't flourishing at the expense of Afrikaners, except, of course, if you count that very small group of politically connected individuals who are doing quite well. But I'm happy to see that we are seeing increased support from all over the world, and that there is also an approach by the United States to contribute also to a solution within South Africa.